The growing tensions in the Middle East and the potential threat of a wider regional war there. A Hamas political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, assassinated in an airstrike in the Iranian capital of Tehran. Hamas and Iran both blaming Israel for that attack. Israel's military has not taken responsibility, but it did post an image online showing him with the word eliminated. It was written on his forehead. Well, that post was taken down about an hour later. Hamas officials slamming Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying they were close to a ceasefire deal in Gaza and that those talks are now meaningless. Haniyeh's death sparking protests in places including the West Bank, Lebanon, and Pakistan. The Hamas leader's assassination also coming just hours after the Israeli military officials say they launched that airstrike in Beirut, killing a senior commander with Hezbollah, another Iranian-backed militant group based there in Lebanon. Hezbollah is now confirming that commander is dead. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today warning against any potential retaliation, saying that Israel will charge a heavy price for aggression. ABC News contributor and former senior CIA field operative Daryl Blocker is joining us now. Daryl, thank you so much for being here with us. So as you're trying to assess all of this, what do you think these coming weeks will look like, especially considering the fact that they're awaiting essentially retaliation from Hezbollah? How involved will Tehran be there now that there's also been this other attack on their own soil?
Kana, honestly, I believe that at some point the saber rattling is going to continue immediately. Just a lot of people standing up saying what they're going to do as they try to figure out what they're really going to do. If Israel were to attack Iran, for every time that the Houthis, the Hezbollah, or Hamas has attacked, maybe this could have ended a long time ago. They are ultimately responsible for funding, training, equipping, and basically pulling the trigger for everything that happens inside of Gaza, West Bank, and from Yemen is at the direction of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So they're embarrassed right now. They are licking their wounds right now, and they are going to continue to ramp up the rhetoric. But Israel has proven that they can get to almost anyone. And those packages were probably prepared long ago, but they were given the green light once those children were killed in the Golan Heights this past weekend.
I know you have talked extensively there about the sources that Israel has, especially within Lebanon there. What do we know, though, Daryl, about Hezbollah's power, right? And then by extension, Iran's capabilities to possibly overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome?
Well, Israel has already evacuated tens of thousands of people from the northern border. Hezbollah, as has been reported earlier today, joined on the 8th of October. They've been sending missiles, firing into Israel off and on since that time. Israel has shown great restraint, at least on the front as it applies to Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is in its own right. They are a very capable intelligence capabilities and intelligence service. They were well trained by Iran, and believe it or not, the Iranians were well trained by the Western services back for many, many years before, of course, the students took over our embassy in Tehran.
And Daryl, earlier today, I want to mention here that Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, he unveiled a resolution that would authorize the use of force by the United States against Iran. He said that the resolution would only be triggered if the president determines that Iran possesses nuclear weapons, and added that it's time to put red lines on Iran's nuclear program. So what is the latest there, to your knowledge, on their nuclear program, and how does that concern change the posture of the United States?
So, Kana, I was serving in Geneva when the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran deal, was being negotiated between the 2007-2010 timeframe. The deal wasn't perfect, but there were senior leaders of the Israeli intelligence apparatus, including a former head of Mossad, a former head of Shin Bet, a foreign minister, who were all in favor of the JCPOA. So the red lines have already been drawn. It was the previous administration that removed those restrictions. Right, wrong, or right or wrong, that is why Iran might be close to achieving what they're going to do to be able to make more bombs. It's not going to change the U.S. approach to this. I don't think Senator Graham's legislation is needed. The intelligence community and our military already has their marching orders on moving forward. So that was more of a political, possibly shot across the bow to show that the United States continues to support the state of Israel, and also to send to the Ayatollahs that we are now preparing to come after you as well if you make the wrong mistakes in terms of their response to this latest action.
All right, I so appreciate your analysis of all of this, Daryl Blocker. I know you'll be joining us later in the show as well. Thank you for being here. I want to bring our big story now to our panel. Joining us today is ABC News contributor and SiriusXM radio host Mike Muse, ABC News contributor and president of Next Gen America, Christina Cinsu-Ramirez, ABC News contributor and editor at the National Review, Ramesh Ponnuru, and ABC News contributor and op-ed columnist for the Los Angeles Times, LZ Granderson. So one note here, everybody, and Christina, we'll start here with you, but we have learned that some flights are actually being suspended into Tel Aviv here, especially from Delta canceling their flights, other airlines as well, just to give you an idea of what a tense situation this is. And Christina, we know here that President Biden has pledged to work toward peace in the Middle East with the remainder of his presidency. So how, Christina, does the president support Israel now that Iran has essentially said they paved their own way for severe punishment?
Well, I think we noticed right away the United States came out and said that they didn't have anything to do with this assassination, that they did not provide intel, that they were not privy to that this was going to happen. And so I think that there is real tension between the Biden administration and Netanyahu. I think that's been on display for the last few months. I think that this action perhaps only grows the tension between our two countries because the United States has been very intent on really containing the war and getting a ceasefire done. And so that is all up in the air right now. And so I don't think we actually even know where the Biden administration is because that's a lot behind closed doors, what they really think.
Certainly. And again, noting here the difference in the U.S. posture and that it sounds like they had intelligence. They had a bit of a heads up that there would be this strike in Beirut, but not on this strike in Tehran. And so, Ramesh, do you think that Israel at this moment is really prepared for any kind of retaliation? We know Iran's UN mission says the response to Hania's assassination will be, quote, harder and intended to instill deep regret in the perpetrator.
Well, I think that Israel has a pretty good sense of its adversaries' capabilities and has taken them into account. But, these calculations are never perfect, and that's the danger in these situations. I just want to point out that a major critique of Israel throughout all of this has been that their counterattack has been indiscriminate, that it's led to too many civilian casualties. Well, this is a targeted attack on the terrorist leaders. And so it'll be interesting to see if the same people who've been criticizing them for not being targeted enough criticize them also for this.
And LZ, to you, we heard Daryl Blocker talk about this a little bit, about all this rhetoric that we're hearing. It's incredibly fiery. But from our reporters on the ground, LZ, they say they asked the questions about how Hezbollah would possibly respond. But the overriding sense, and I'm reading here, this is Matt Rivers and team, the overriding sense is that both sides will likely find a way to not escalate an all-out war here.
Well, it makes sense to me, Kana, when you think about not just the history in terms of October 7th of last year, but just the history of this conflict in general, starting with the 1960s, if you will. It would make sense to me if they really wanted to escalate to an all-out war that would have lasted months or years, that would have happened. I think both parties realize that while they may not like each other, may not even be comfortable being next to each other, this tension between each other is significantly better than an all-out war in which there's destruction for everyone involved. And so it is encouraging to hear that the rhetoric isn't about escalating to a much larger war. When you think about the fact that Gaza was considered an open-air prison on October 6th, on October 5th, on top of 4th, I think it's really hard to try to just pinpoint one side in this in terms of who started it. And I'm glad to see that both sides are saying, let's not take this even further than something that neither one of us want.
Right, and I don't want to lose sight of the suffering that is happening here. When you talk about Gaza, we have over 100 hostages, by the way, that are also still being held by Hamas. And so, Mike, when you try to assess this, what about the talks of a potential ceasefire or a hostage exchange? Reiterating here that the words now are ceasefire deal in Gaza potentially meaningless. That's sort of what we're hearing.
I think you and I have the same brain at this point. That's exactly what I've been thinking about this entire time, is that for the families of the hostages, this is their worst case scenario for this conflict to occur and for the tension to be this high, because that means that ceasefire talks have stalled and possibility of hostage negotiations has stalled. I'm also, too, thinking about all the humanitarian organizations and activists who are fighting on behalf of the Palestinian people to make sure they have the basic necessities of food and water and medical supplies. Watching this tension grow, it's less likely those humanitarian aids and assets will be able to get into that space and place for this to come to an end. I hear all of what your panelists are saying, Kana, and what Daryl has mentioned too as well. I think this time, though, is absolutely different. I think all those other times those conflicts have happened almost in an isolation bubble. This is a time now, because of Israeli-Hamas war, because of October the 7th, the world is watching. And now that the world is watching, egos are involved, right? And gamesmanship is involved. And so my concern is, does the ego and gamesmanship override logic and temperament in terms of retaliation? And does Iran and Lebanon do strategic responses that doesn't escalate? Or does the ego and gamesmanship increase for more of a militarized attack, which then Israel has to respond? And then that's when we get into the conflict. Delta and other airlines suspending, I think that they're there.
Yeah, and you heard Daryl Blocker there note on the fact that Tehran is embarrassed in this moment by the attack on their own soil, and how will that dictate any response if there is one? Mike, Christina, Ramesh, and Elzie, thanks to all of you.